they've hiked up their own sort of power. They sort of claim that they're the regional superpower, and at the moment they seem to be absent from the field. And again, it's a major psychological blow for them. I mean, in this sense, the Israelis have played a very sharp game indeed.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Neil, and this is Times Radio. Israel is intensifying its attacks on the various Iranian proxy forces which threaten it. Hamas says the leader of its Lebanese group has been killed by Israeli airstrikes. Israel continues to decapitate the leadership of Hezbollah, a far more powerful Iranian proxy than Hamas. Israel has even carried out long-range attacks in Yemen on the military resources of the Houthi, another Iranian-backed group. And the militant Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine now reports that 3 of its leaders were killed in an Israeli attack on central Beirut. Last week on this show, we warned that despite the international clamour, there was little prospect of a ceasefire. All the more so now, Israeli tanks are massing for a ground offensive into Hezbollah-held territory in southern Lebanon. There are reports that Israeli special forces have already crossed the border and are operating inside Hezbollah tunnels. All of which raises the key question: what will Iran do? Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, they've all been bankrolled and armed by Iran at huge cost. Tehran has done so to terrorize Israel with its proxy forces, since its own scope for action is limited. But will it now stand by and watch them be pummeled by Israel? There's always been a fear that Israel's retaliation would lead to a wider war. But whatever exactly would that look like? What will Iran do? What can it do? Ali Ansari is Professor of Iranian History, Director of the Institute for Iranian Studies at the University of St Andrews. He joins me now. Welcome, Professor, to the show.
Thank you.
For all the rhetoric that's come out of Iran over the weeks and months from Tehran, it seems to me that Iran's options are actually quite limited.
Well, I think they're severely rattled by what's gone on, and they're not really quite sure what to do and what the answer is. You have to bear in mind that their position, their official position, is not really popular among their own people. So they've got to calibrate whatever they do very, very carefully. They'll want to be seen to be doing something, but it's not at all clear what this might be yet, and it will probably not be quite as dramatic as what they did back in April.
They said they would do something after that top Hamas leader was killed in Tehran, yes. But I don't think they've done anything, have they?
No, not at all. And I mean, even now, you're getting commentary in Iran saying, in some ways trying to sort of extricate themselves out of having to do anything by saying, actually, Hezbollah hasn't really been affected at all, not in the fundamentals. So they're trying to find ways actually not to do anything. But of course, there are lots of pressures on them in terms of, A, their own bluster. I mean, they have to somehow live up to their own bluster. 2, they obviously have their regional proxies that are saying, what the hell are you doing? And then tied to that, they've got their own pretty awful domestic situation, which they know, if they get engaged in a sort of a hot war with Israel, is not going to come out well.
Well, Hezbollah must be a little bit disappointed in its paymasters. I mean, it's in real trouble. It's reeling from this Israeli onslaught, and it's not even underway on the ground yet. But it's not, as far as I can see, Professor, getting any help from Tehran.
Well, it's aside from a healthy dose of rhetoric, it's not getting much at all. And I think even when you go back to the April the 13th, 14th attack, that a lot of that was due to pressure coming from proxies saying, where are you? Why have you abandoned the field, and why won't you help? So then they did try and do something, but obviously it didn't really work out quite as well as they would have liked. But they've hiked up their own sort of power. They sort of claim that they're the regional superpower, and at the moment they seem to be absent from the field. And again, it's a major psychological blow for them. I mean, in this sense, the Israelis have played a very sharp game indeed.
Iran's new president, he's meant to be something of a moderate, though I'm never quite sure what that means in Iranian terms.
These are all relative.
Yes, exactly. But yesterday he called for a regional response to Israel. What does that mean?
Well, my sympathies for Pezeshkian is really direct to the fact that he's something of a he's quite naive when it comes to foreign policy. He has no foreign policy experience at all. And if you look at some of his comments when he was at the UN, I mean, he was making all sorts of weird and wonderful comments, some of which I think will result in him being given a very swift rap on the knuckles when he gets back to Tehran. He's basically someone who's meant to be showing the window dressing of the Islamic Republic, basically, making some nice noises, but he's not really in control of things at all. And I think if you look at the range of his comments that he's made, I mean, they've been quite a wide range. He's clearly all at sea.
There's obvious concern of a wider war, particularly as Israel strikes out in every direction against these proxies. It's very understandable. People fear that. But it's not clear to me what that would mean in terms of Israel and Iran. Iran is 1,000 miles from southern Lebanon. If the conflict was to escalate further, how could Iran realistically intervene? I mean, it couldn't get a massive army 1,000 miles into southern Lebanon or Syria, could it?
Well, I mean, and this is the problem, and this is why it hedged its bets really with Hezbollah and its other proxies. And as these proxies are being dismantled effectively or put into disarray, the only thing the Iranians are really, can do now is really a sort of a missile attack as they did back in April, or some sort of air attack. But of course, on that front, they're wildly outnumbered, or the capacity of the Israelis to inflict damage back is much, much greater than whatever the Iranians can do. Particularly since Hezbollah has been effectively, at least for the time being, quite neutered, really.
Given, despite all the money that Iran has lavished on it, I guess if you were from the supreme leader down, part of the Iranian regime, and you would look at what the Israelis have been able to do with pagers and walkie-talkies, and what they did to the Hamas leading Hamas man in Tehran itself, you'd actually, although you might be talking in a bellicose way, your big worry might be what happens next time you pick up the phone if you're not going to be blown to smithereens.
Well, I think they're very, very concerned. And if you look, behind the scenes effectively at their own, what they're commenting on themselves, they've made it very clear that they've been, they accept they've been infiltrated very, very heavily by the Israelis. So the question is what do you do? So there's a public facing sort of messaging that they want to put out that all is okay and we're all on track. I think privately there's a huge amount of anxiety going on as to how far the Israelis have managed to penetrate. I mean, I think the assassination of Haniyeh in particular in Tehran was quite shocking for them. I mean, it seems to be that someone had got right in, into the heart of Tehran with a rocket launcher of some sort. Now, how their
he was in a government building.
That's right. I mean, and how their security, and he was being protected ostensibly by the Revolutionary Guards, so it didn't look very good for them either. I mean, he's the latest of a number, by the way. I mean, it's not what the Israelis have been doing, a steady drip of attacks over a number of years, really.
So just to finish up almost where we started, in your expert view, Iran's options, as we fear a wider war, Iran's options are actually rather limited, and there isn't, on the face of it, there would seem that it's not that much it can do to deter Israel.
Well, I think this is the problem. I mean, it is limited, and it's limited not only by its own military capacity, which I think is probably less sophisticated than it presented, but also because it's sitting on a population that it knows is not in favour of any sort of war with Israel. In fact, it's sitting on a population that, in many ways, actually quite supported the killing of Nasrallah. So it's got this dual-facing problem, and it's the only thing it can really do is to sit tight, really, for the moment and hope it will pass.
Professor, thank you for coming on today and marking our card. It's fascinating. That's Ali Ansari, Professor of Iranian History at the University of St Andrews.